Okay, everybody out there in YouTube land, I am Matt Yancik. I am the founder and the head game master at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain, and welcome to tonight's episode of Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. I am super excited tonight to have a titan of the industry, of the gaming world, one of the founding fathers, one of the people that laid the foundation for gaming today as we know it. This man needs no introduction, and yet I'm making one anyway for him, just because this is that part of the program. I have with me Jeff Grubb tonight. He is a legendary creator. He was the overseer and the designer of numerous RPG projects. He's the author of a multitude of RPG-centric comic books and novels. And he is, I would say, he is the architect for a good portion of the foundation on which we play our games these days. Jeff, as I finish buttering you up, how are you?
I'm doing real fine. Thank you for asking me on.
No, thank you for like coming down off the mountain and you know.
I don't put myself down as a titan. I'd say I'm a cloud giant at best.
Oh, okay. All right. You're being so modest.
I mean, the people I respected coming into the hobby, the original designers, the ones who basically started the whole process, basically laid the foundations, and basically we built upon them, and we created a good, strong structure that people enjoy and play our games even today. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you're a modest guy. I think we all know, viewers know, who are watching know that you had a lot more to do with it than that. And so I'd like to kind of like take us back a bit, even before that time, and ask you a little bit about your childhood, Jeff. Were you so creative, and were you like so? Were you so prolific? I mean, prolific is probably a word that.
I don't think so. I mean, I think what I was an avid reader. My parents are both teachers, and so I read a lot of histories and science, and eventually science fiction. Mm-hmm. I was one of those kids who we got a set of World Book encyclopedias, and I read through those. So it's the beginning of the whole, what I call the repository of useless information. So I know a little bit about everything as a result of just like exposure and being able to. I didn't really start creating things nearly as much until I got into college. High school, a couple of things. But when I got to college, I was the student newspaper. It was a college radio station. There were some writing awards for like essay contests, and of course Dungeons and Dragons. And so there was definitely, but as before college, I was, I would say, pretty average. Read way too much.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that was something that your parents, being the teachers they were, like instilled in you, or was that something that they sort of just allowed? They stepped back and it happened to blossom that way?
I think my parents did encourage it. They did encourage me to be a reader, to engage, to that we had a lot of books in the household. Not a huge library, but we had a lot of old volumes, a lot of histories, and that really caught my attention. And we did a lot of I did a lot of my early research for that.
And so, what sort of books were you reading when you were in those?
I mentioned the World Book Encyclopedia because I got into that. Winston Churchill did a 4-book series on the history of the world, wow. And that was one of the books that was on my parents' shelf. I quickly started branching out and got into science fiction. which were like digest books, digest magazines like Analog
Yes.
and Fantasy and Science Fiction, Galaxy eventually, Isaac Asimov's SF magazine eventually. And so a lot of the fiction that I was, embracing was material that was, being serialized or short stories. A lot of writers I've encountered for the first time there. One thing in particular, was in Analog. Later in the magazine named after him, Isaac Asimov had a science column in which he would explain things, and I thought that was a great job to basically have the job of explaining things to people.
Yeah.
And that was just a wonderful opportunity. So I really enjoyed those when I was a kid.
I think then, not to jump ahead too far, but for someone that's read your blog, actually that was one of the things that I was sort of thinking. So for those of you watching at home, some of you might know that I'm a teacher, and so I'm always thinking about how I can convey information. I don't necessarily know the information, but my job is to convey it to a group of people and make it digestible by them. And so reading through your blog, I could sort of see that in the way that you create your entries. Your entries are easily accessible to the average person coming in. So there's a lot of information in them, like we were saying before the program, like you were talking about the quarters and the coins that you were collecting and looking at. But I don't necessarily have to have a great knowledge of them from outside of what I see there in your entry, because you lay the foundations and kind of layer it, and you take it to the point where you can kind of show someone. So I think for sure
A friend once told me that my writing style is very much we're talking in a bar, that sort of accessibility and gauging who's there and what and how much I can assume, and just being very colloquial and very, very conversational,
right,
in the approach.
Yeah, I agree. And what's funny is someone in the chat has just spoken up. So Brock in the chat was saying the World Book Encyclopedia, read those on many a bored pre-internet day. And I can actually identify. My grandmother got me like the Encyclopedia Britannica. It was like the youngsters version or something. And I remember doing the same thing. And now that I think about it, that kind of connects to you.
The World Book I have is the white fake leather with green binding of the type. It was basically, I think, basically being sold through, grocery stores at the time. And it was just, I have my little bookshelf that was basically, would fit just exactly that. You mentioned Britannica. I have one of the things I've acquired over the years is an old Britannica from the early 30s. And I use that when I'm doing research for like Call of Cthulhu and stuff set in the 1920s. This is
nice.
This is a volume that basically talks about, how Germany will come back from the war once that Hitler feller, straightens up and flies right. So, it's a very interesting time capsule. Old encyclopedias, old books, it's basically their pictures into the past of showing us, what people were thinking, what people thought was important back then. So
I think that's really interesting. It reminds me of like Frank Lloyd Wright saying not on the mountain, but of the mountain, right? And so what's interesting to me about that is that if you're writing something, a period piece, you're not writing, obviously, it's hard to sort of forget the fact that we live in the now, but if you're getting out sources of information from that era, then you are, I would assume, kind of like laying foundations and creating from that perspective and sort of creating a document that feels like it's not about the 1930s, it's from the 1930s about Cthulhu or whatever.
Exactly. We mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright. In the Pittsburgh area, he's famous for Falling Water, which was a residential house for the Kaufman family. And it was, basically he had the falls to deal with. And he built the house over the falls as opposed to with a view of the falls. So if you wanted to see the falls, you had to leave the house and basically walk around to see the house on top of the falls.
That's right. That's right. And it's funny you mentioned Pittsburgh. I spent the first 7 or 8 years of my life. My father worked at the Pittsburgh airport,
Okay.
and then he transferred out. But I was basically born and raised in that area.
So what? I'll ask. What neighborhood?
Well, not in Pittsburgh proper, but do you know? Have you ever heard of Hookstown? Never. Beaver Valley?
Never. Beaver Valley, I've heard of. Okay.
Yeah, so I was in the Beaver Valley area,
Okay.
and we used to go out like shopping at Hills department stores and
Right.
things like that. I don't even know if Hills is still around.
I don't
But
think so.
we used to go there, and my father would fly in like every weekend because he had taken the job, but up in Hartford, but he was still like coming back. And this interview is not about me anyway; it's about you. So
No. This is the type of thing. Yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh is a community of neighborhoods, and my parents taught in Mount Lebanon, and I went to school in Mount Lebanon. When I got out of college, I lived in Shady Side, and near Squirrel Hill in that area.
Yes.
So this Pittsburgh just basically. Pittsburghers will tell you where they,
Right.
what not just where in Pittsburgh, what suburb, what neighborhood they were
Very
in, what part of
specific.
that neighborhood, and if there was an Isley's nearby. So
That's right. Oh my God, that's so funny.
this is local stuff, people.
I know.
So-
Sorry, I'm a very niche demographic here. I'm role playing fans that are from Pittsburgh and,
Yes.
and like to talk old TSR stuff and about
Both of
Frank
them.
Lloyd Wright.
I think that's us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
We're
all of
it.
us. So it's just an audience of two. So then you ended up. You're saying that not until college you sort of got into the D&D stuff and all that. But before that, you were going to school for civil engineering. Is that correct?
Yes, I went to school, Purdue University, civil engineering, and backing up just a little bit, when I was in junior high, when I was young, played games with my younger brother, like Risk, basically that type of thing. We had the American Heritage series of games from Milton Bradley, which had plastic figures and boards, and Broadside and Battle Cry and Hit the Beach. And from that went to Risk. It basically was what the game of hiding in Australia until you're ready to move out with all your forces, and then into war games like SPI and Avalon Hill. And when I got to college, there was the Purdue Wargamer Club. I've told this story before in several places, but I went there, and basically, there was a group of people in the corner rolling dice, yelling at each other, and they didn't have a board in front. They didn't have miniatures out. And I walked over and asked what was going on. Somebody handed me 3 6-sided dice and said, "Here, we need a cleric." And that was the beginning of my engagement with D&D. And I started, I played in a campaign at that time, and then I started designing my own. Creating. So basically parallel with my work as an engineer, my studies as an engineer, I was doing a lot more creative work as well. I started, creating my own dungeon, spent a year doing movie reviews for the Purdue Exponent. That was our student newspaper. It's an you can tell it's an engineering school. And we had a radio station in the dorm, WLAY. We did a 2-hour humor show, and played, funny records and did skits and everything, and got in trouble with the administration. So all of this, getting into college, I started, branching out and doing more than just thinking about science, thinking about engineering, thinking about tensile strength of wood products, and that sort of thing. It was part of the, I think growing into being who I was.
So then, do you think? So it wasn't. So when you say that though, it's not that you were just like, I don't really feel like doing this civil engineering thing. It was like you were discovering this part of yourself that you just hadn't known. And
my English classes kept my grade point alive. I won a couple awards for essays over the years. It basically but I did not think of myself as someone who would be primarily a writer or primarily a game designer. I felt that I was going to be a engineer, and Pittsburgh, basically has a strong engineering, cadre. So we basically had a lot of, so that was sort of the plan. Now, as a result of being at Purdue University, we started going to Gen Con. Gang and I, we had a friend, member of our D&D group, whose parents had a house on Lake Geneva. And so we'd go up the week before school would begin. This was when Gen Con was in August. Mm-hmm. And we would basically spend a week at the lake, go to Gen Con, and then show up for class. And we got involved with the D&D Open at that time. We started moderating. They were looking for DMs to run the D&D Open. And that was a big tournament that they ran every year with, big teams of 10 people each, and there were like maybe 30 of us GMing, and we would be checking back and forth, how do the characters do this, and somebody wrote the adventures that year, and some of them became published adventures. And this was something that our gang did. We became regular participants in Gen Con. And at one point, one of my friends, after one session, and this was before the RPGA. The RPGA came on later. I'm like officially I'm member number 8. I think that was the number on my card. Okay. This was later when I was working at TSR. I was coming down the hall. I ran into Frank Menser, and Frank was setting up the RPGA and said, "Hey, you want to be a member?" And I said, "Sure." He pulled out a list of cards. And he gave me one.
And he just
I said 8. Okay, so that's my RPGA number. But back then, it was just the D&D Open, and there were like prizes from miniature companies and the like. So it was a bit of a big deal. And after one session, one of my friends basically loudly proclaimed, "That wasn't very good. We could do better than that." Mm-hmm. And he said it within earshot of Bob Blake, who ran the D&D Open. And Bob spun on his heel and said, "Congratulations, you just volunteered to write next year's Gen Con."
Perfect.
So, and this is how I started getting involved in actually writing adventures for publication. Okay. We got paid for it. We delivered it in February. And on the strength of that, I got my job at TSR full time. During this period, I had graduated from college. I had gone to work for a company called Wheelabrator Fry, which was our area was making overgrown vacuum cleaners that you would hook up to a factory, and it would suck the air in, right? And then basically pass it through bags, and then they would shake the bags and everything would fall down into awaiting a car to be hauled away, awaiting a train car. And so it's called Wheelabrator because basically to get the shaking motion, we used an off-sized egg-shaped wheel, and that is called a Wheelabrator. So there's your useless fact for the day.
I love it. Let me write that down and be sure to relay that to my students tomorrow, because I have to keep up,
with
the
what's
useless
going
fact of the day,
and
with
that's
my
one
students, right? That's how the wheel of the Wheelabrator of useless facts turns.
In any event, in the early 80s, there was a sudden decline in interest in environmental engineering. And so they laid off a third of the company. And so I had free time and dedicated a lot of it to getting this project done and turned over to TSR. And as I was looking for a job, I started, we were talking about the adventure, getting things set up, doing playtesting. Yeah. And so I would be calling into TSR and I would be talking to, after a conversation, I asked them to pass me on to Diane Buckles, who was the head of personnel at that time. And we'd chat for a while. And, and I'd say, "Is there anything going on?" She said, "I don't know. Let me check," that sort of thing. Any job openings? Because I'm looking for a full-time job. And at one point I said, "I'm going to be out there for a wedding. Do you mind if I drop in?" And she said, "I have no problem with that." And when I said out there, I meant I was going to a wedding in Indiana.
Right.
And TSR's in Wisconsin, so it's only 2 states over.
You're in the region.
And I mean, the region has its own name. You know, that's that chunk of Indiana that belongs to Chicago. But that's another story. The but I basically went there and I interviewed. It was very inadvertent, and like I went back to do the wedding, and during the wedding they called and said yeah, we'd like to offer you a job. And this wedding was from gaming friends who I had played with at Purdue
Right.
University. So they all found out at the same time I found out that I had a job with PSR. They were very excited by the prospect.
Did that overshadow the wedding?
No,
People
not in
like,
the least.
eh.
No, not in the least. It was one of those goofy things that happened around Jeff. You know,
Right.
it's just
What is the interview like? You just said, "Oh, I had an interview." What happens? Like
literally,
you walk in and
it was very informal. You know, basically, I was talking with Alan Hammock, who is the head of the design department, and we chatted about general things, what we did, the nature that the project I'd worked on, which was like Quest for the King. It was a really lame name. That was was broken into 7 parts, and who worked on what, and what they do, and how did they compare, and and it was on the strength of that they said, okay, he's got potential. Let's hire. Now, years later, we had design tests and batteries and interview a whole bunch of people, but it was very informal. It wasn't quite at the level of, there was a time where if you interviewed a TSR, you would come up and probably sleep on Gary's couch type of thing, that sort of thing. There was a lot of people. Our team of creatives came from all over the place. One of them was Heidi Gygax's teacher. And basically, shuffled over to become a game designer. One of them was, worked in a movie theater and was involved in used car sales. We have some former ministers. We had like a whole bunch of people coming from a very broad spectrum, because at the time, you don't go to school to learn game design.
Right.
That's not something we're making up the rules as we go along, like how we're going to do this.
So with that in mind, did you find, and I see a connection here, but I don't know if it's true because you're the one with the experience in both areas, but is there a connection between like your interest in civil engineering and then the game design itself? Like, I feel like there is, but
Yes.
I don't really know. Like, what would the connection be?
There's a couple of things. I always say I used to design buildings. Now I design worlds. But part of it is boring. But one of the big challenges for an engineer is to find out what the problem is to bore down and discover, ask the right questions, talk to the people who are using the materials, the subject, the building, the whatever, and understanding at a fundamental level what's there so you can start building, so you can answer the right question the right way. In every engineering office in the country, there is a piece of photographed paper of someone designing a tire swing. And it's the tire swing as the as they put it in the budget, and the tire swing as the safety people wanted, and the tire swing as the engine, and it basically shows all the weakness. And in the end, of course, is what they wanted was just a tire swing. And that's the sort of thing that engineers, I think that's part of what carries me forward. Another part is a healthy respect for deadlines and organization. And as going forward in time, as I'm dealing with a lot more individuals, how all the pieces come together. We had studied a type of scheduling, which allowed us to, basically, if you got the electricians coming in here, they have to be in after the foundation shows up, but before the walls go in, so basically they have to occupy this time schedule. And this is very fundamental for what they do with Jira and other modern programs as far as scheduling. And we did this learned this back in the late 70s as far as a process.
So did you, like, when you were designing that initial adventure, I think you said it was 7 parts or in 7 installments?
It was going to be run over 4 days.
Oh, 4 days.
So it was like 2 days of the first round, And from there, the best, the group that did best would go to the semifinals, and from that, the best would go to the finals. So we had like 4 initial rounds, 2 semifinals, and 1 final.
So
And
well, I was just going to say, so then when you're designing it, are you thinking like I have to structure it in such a way so that each level something progressively larger happens, something bigger happens, something?
It's not going to be the same audience every time. It's going to be a new group, so it has to be self-contained, and you have to be able to explain it so the people who are playing the third qualifying match understood what was going on. And you also want to basically make sure it has an equal balance. So the first adventure of the day is equally balanced to the third adventure of the day. Though it's going to be different subjects because we don't want people to come out and share information so that they're but basically, are they going to have for a while? We would have, and this carried over into the RPGA, we'd have like a big combat adventure, a small combat adventure, a monster used in a new or different way, an original monster that you haven't fought before, a trick or trap, an encounter you can avoid, and all that became part of like, again, this is an engineering. These are requirements. These are the standards by which we then say, oh, okay, that's how I can do it. So there's a lot of, we're putting up a lot of initial walls. So we can basically design around that, and that's stuff we can bounce off of.
So then when you're designing the adventure, you have something on paper, right? And so here's something that always kind of, I think about this a lot of times as a teacher as well. So if I have if there are 4 cohorts in 6th grade, and we're all grading our students and say it's standards based,
right?
Each classroom is self-contained, right? So in the case of 4 D&D adventures all going on at the same time, how do you, if this happens, I don't know, how do you sort of basically maintain integrity between, or maybe the same sorts of
with a whole bunch of different DMs as well. You have the adventures itself, and then we had like an hour-long briefing meeting before every session in which we went over the adventure and answered questions, and even that's not necessarily a good guarantee. We had one particular session where one DM just ran us through every question. He basically, had questions here. What if they do this? What if they do that? And we were patient with it, and he wiped them out in the first room. He had a TPK, I'm just playing what they designed us. Oh, gee, so that it didn't always work out.
Yeah. And I would imagine, that's the same. It's kind of the same thing in teaching as well. We all try to have our meeting. We try to discuss what we're doing at the beginning of the year, and then we check in with each other as the year progresses, and we want to make sure that we're holding the kids to the same standards.
But ultimately, everybody plays their own way, and that's actually one of the things of the design of Dungeons and Dragons through its various editions. Is you can see places where we got more AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, tried to nail down a lot more pieces than were in D&D, and 4th edition basically approached a much more blocks computer game type of approach as far as abilities. And the new current 5th edition has a lot more it's a little more freestyle. It's got a lot more, the GM can basically put thumbs on the scale and basically with the advantage disadvantage system make things a more exciting adventure. And maybe stress more about the enjoyment and the pleasure necessarily of the group and all of that over versus we get a little, okay, here's a little TPK I'm going to throw at you. You can wiggle it one way or the other. So then if you make it, you're at TSR then, and these are the golden years of working at TSR. The trouble with golden age is you never know when you're in one, so until afterwards.
Did you not feel it then? You're like, oh wow, I'm making games up. This is great.
We did not. I did not feel I had arrived. Because we had a lot to do and a lot of opportunities and a lot of product that we had to create. We wrote an awful lot right
Yeah,
there.
you're
They
kind of
had
churning it out.
they had set up a design department.
Right.
You know, if you could do 1,000 words a day, that's, you know, that's great. But, you know, basically everything's in the schedule. Everything has to, you know, basically keep on moving. It's like making movies during the studio system.
Right.
This is the slot we have for it. If there's a problem, we're going to have to find out about it. Plus, you know, a lot of new adventures, new ideas were coming in. A lot of new opportunities were showing up. We had a very young team of very, very talented young men and women. We just, the design department was divided into designers and editors. And the designers were, you know, basically involved in the creation of the product. The editors were, I always refer to as, they turned it into English. Because, you know, and basically formatted it, got everything organized, worked with pre-press, checked the galleys. You know, I'll come back to this hopefully a couple more times, but editors are like the key to the entire operation. The first product I did was on a typewriter, and then we fed it into the computer mainframe, which basically was not a PC. It was basically the company computer that we use for paychecks and everything. And it was a program called like Edit2 or Text Editor or something.
Were they like, they weren't punch? We're not talking about punch cards.
We aren't quite punch cards, but that wasn't, you know, wasn't us yet. We were a step above that, but we slowly got to the idea of monitors that, you know, really could, you know, display things. I mean, they were just the old-fashioned war games type, would you like to play a game type of text monitors. We had two, we started in the old hotel. I was there very briefly, which is downtown Lake Geneva. It was above the Dungeon Hobby Shop. I was on the third floor. It was a building that was literally verging on being condemned. It's been renovated. They have a chocolate shop in the on the first floor, and the upper floors are nice offices. But at the time, we could not hold a meeting in any particular room for fear that the building would fall over from just the added live stress of all the people there. We moved to a much larger facility attached to a warehouse out by the highway on Sheridan Springs Road. We were in a big vault without windows that was above the warehouse assembly area. And so that was sort of like, we were very industrial. We were very, you know, catch as catch can. We were setting up, and my first desk, I think, was like Jim Ward's, or at one point one of my predecessors, who since, you know, basically, you know, moved up to the big building. And like I said, before the old hotel, there was this just tiny house that was right next to the Pizza Hut in town, and that was a home base for Dragon Magazine. My friend,
okay, cool.
My friend, who basically, whose parents had a house on the lake, his sister was a fantasy artist. So one time we were going up to the lake, and he said, well, I have to deliver something for my sister. And it was a cover of Dragon Magazine. So I went with him to this house. This had been turned into offices, and the computer cables were laid out on the floor. And so that you didn't damage anything, they built little wooden bridges over them and then laid carpeting over them. So the floor looked like a putt-putt golf course. It basically had this sort of, and I met Kim Mohan was the first TSR employee I met as a result, because he was the head of Dragon Magazine at that time.
That's so cool. And so then, who was it? Like, if you thought back to that beginning or that time, was there someone in particular that was maybe like a mentor to you, or took on kind of like that influenced you, or?
Say that I wouldn't say we had mentors per se. We had very good managers, Alan Hammock, Harold Johnson. But as far as, we did a lot of swapping back and forth, a lot of bouncing ideas off each other. It was more of a crew type thing, because we were all breaking in. The most experienced guy that I worked with, basically had done it before, i.e. he had a product published by TSR, was David Zeb Cook. Who's now with Elder Scrolls Online. And he was, you know, very much the grizzled veteran, even though he's like my age. And like I said, we hung out together as a result of, we're in Lake Geneva, not a lot to do. we played volleyball at his house. You know, we do dinners together. It was very much a strong, you know, esprit de corps. And the rest of the team, I mean, from the design end, Bruce Nesmith, Doug Niles, Tracy Hickman, all of these were just, you know, this was sort of a core group of designers. And our editors, I'd say one of the most influential editors, he's still a friend, is Steve Winter. And Steve has done more amazing editing work over the years than anyone else I know. And I've worked with him on a number of projects, including Marvel Superheroes, and he's always impressed me with both his ability and his patience. that was always, you know, he could cut loose when he had to, but he just, you know, was very, you know, getting everything set up, getting everything working. Okay, right. We're fine.
Right. So then he would kind of cut you loose, and then you would get the product done, and then we get the product done. Kind of...
Right. The designers and the editors were, you know, there was an editing department. Sometimes they had a boss. We had a design department. Sometimes we were the boss. We were both under design, and our Uber boss was like Harold Johnson, Alan Hammock, Troy Denning. All of these people had, you know, basically time as our bosses. When Troy came on board, they didn't want to tell anybody how old he was because he was younger than the entire design staff.
Oh.
So.
Oops.
So, no, it's quite all right. He was the Beloit bouncer because that's what he did before he started at TSR.
So when did you start? Like, was there a first? When I say project, was there like a first setting or something that you kind of worked on? Did you bring? Was it Dragonlance or was it something or was it
before the first product I finished? The first project I worked on at TSR was a Boot Hill module called Burn Bush Wells. Larry Elmore cover, and what it was is Alan Hammock gave me. I think it was a random encounter table for the wilderness. And Brian Bloom gave me a sketch of this town that he had created called Burn Bush Wells. And I was supposed to put it together. And so I basically, you know, created an adventure where you had the town set up and everything was set up, and in Boot Hill, you know, that didn't have a lot of stats. So, you know, so basically getting variety there, and then adventures that sent you out into the wilderness, riding the lines, and basically, you know, checking the barbed wire and everything, and that type of conflict. And that was my first one I worked on. The first one I published was called Maze of the Riddling Minotaur, and it was a magic marker adventure. And this is where you had this little yellow pen, and basically you would rub it over the thing and reveal the text, so you could play it solitaire, and you know, and then when you were done, you could play it for a large group. Now the pen would tend to run out of ink, and it would also tend to dry out after too long, so you don't see it nearly as much as far as collectors are concerned, because it's all, you know, all the pens dry, but that's okay because the mystery ink has now risen to the surface, so you can read it in the old copies.
So finally, you can.
So, but that's a good example of the type of thing we were experimenting. We were trying to see what else could be done.
I was going to ask though, did someone come to you and say, "Hey, we're going to do this idea, we're going to do this thing," or did you kind of like throw something out, or
both? For the two I mentioned were very much assignments of, we were planning on doing a module. It's going to have a magic marker in it. Go. What do you got?
Right.
And okay, we have a maze, we have a minotaur, you know, that sort of thing. So basically, you know, I would pitch and we would propose. When I got there, we had several occasions where they would come down and say, "We need you to pitch us adventures. Pitch us 3 beginner adventures. Pitch us 3 intermediate. Pitch us 3 war games. Pitch us 3 top secrets adventures." You know, so all of these, you know, type of things. And this is sort of where Dragonlance came from, as far, you know, as my contact with it, because Tracy pitched 3 adventures that revolved around dragons. One for good dragons, one for neutral dragons, one for evil dragons. And Alan thought that was great because this was Dungeons and Dragons. We don't have a lot of adventures about dragons. And he encouraged Trace to broaden that, to basically, basically make it a larger thing. Why don't we do one for every color of dragon? And by this time, we had moved into the new building, and there was an initial team of Tracy was first, Harold Johnson, who was our boss by that time, was second, myself, and an editor named Carl Smith. And we laid out a lot of foundation for what we would do as this project kept getting larger. And Tracy had this great idea for an epic, for this major, heroic adventure of characters, banding together to fight a dragon menace. And this became the foundation for Dragonlance. And we made a pitch to the upper levels of management. And Larry Elmore, who pops up in these conversations a lot, did.
I wonder why.
Because they had a golden age over in art as well. Yeah. Elmore, Easley, Caldwell, Parkinson, Jeff Butler. These were, the names to conjure with in fantasy art at this time. And Larry, of course, was just incredible to work with. But he worked out four color roughs for us to make with the presentation. And each of the four people got one of those color roughs. And I have mine downstairs in my downstairs. The original, we took a photo of it, and it's in the Arts and Arcana book that was released last year.
Oh, no way.
So basically, I've got, I've got like original art in my house from people I've worked with on projects I've worked with. That's the cover of Lord Toad behind me.
Is that the original?
That's the original.
Oh my gosh.
We auctioned it off at the company to raise charity funds, and two different groups decided, hey, Jeff would really like this, let's buy it. So they're bidding against each other until they realized they were both bidding on it to give it to me.
Same thing.
So yeah,
that's the best way to do it.
We raised money
at the auction too. That's great. So then it sounds kind of like you're like, you guys are sort of working as just this sort of like little ideas machine, and you're just sort of bouncing things on. It sounds like a Marvel bullpen kind of thing, where like everybody's just throwing stuff back and forth, and it just snowballs, and then by the time it gets big, it's probably pretty cool, and then the guys upstairs like almost have to say, yeah, that's great.
Well, one thing that had an effect for the creation of both Dragonlance and Marvel superheroes is there was a period where upper management said, you aren't going to work on anything unless we approve it. And we're going to take everything you work on and we're going to review it. And the first week they got a pile of papers this thick, and the second week they got a pile of papers this thick, and the third week we didn't send anything down and they didn't ask for any more. But we had some time. So as a result, we did a lot of playtesting. Tracy did a lot of work with maps of Kryn, of Ansalon, before and after the devastation. I did a lot of work on the Marvel superheroes tables, the universal table. And that basically allowed us a lot of breathing room to come up with different ideas, different concepts, and basically move products forward. And I think that's one reason the products of that era were so, well put together, because while we had a lot of pressure on us from a time aspect, we also had a lot of time to be able to, evolve them.
Can I ask you, so this is related here, and I hear the word all the time. I hear playtest, 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 and I have my own idea of what a playtest is, and I think a lot of people have an idea of what a playtest is, but I often wonder if we people out there actually playing it know what the playtest really is. When you decide you're going to playtest this material, do you say, okay, everybody meet in room 5 at 10 o'clock, we're going to run through this combat 7 times, or we're going to test out the magic system here, and we're going to see what happens when this... How does that work?
Sometimes we actually would regularly, would have like Thursday afternoons playtest time. Basically, you can have something that's good play tested, and it could be an adventure, it could be a combat. We've tested, we joke that a lot of our combat testing consists of bar fights, because basically the setup is basically, okay, we're fighting a bar, that type of thing. A lot of it is thumbing it in, basically says, yeah, that looks good. So often there's a case of, just having a chance to, guess educated guesses. Some of it come from our bull sessions of, how we're going to make this happen. I think this encounter is too tough, that sort of thing. Doug Niles, testing companion, sicked an invisible dragon on us and TPK'd us. Okay, that may be a bit much.
So
okay, how do we playtest? Yeah, exactly. We also would do outside playtests when we did Marvel Superheroes. When we had a first draft of the rules, they took it to a bunch of junior high school students because that was the age group they were looking for. And they say, here are the rules. Tell us what you think. And they videotaped. And then they tied me to a chair and they made me watch the videotape. And they did okay, but it's just painful to watch people learning how to play a game with no adult supervision.
But it's so interesting, though, because you have to think to yourself, and I have to think this as a teacher, too, right? A bunch of adults who are professionals and sitting around and doing this by design have a certain way of approaching it. But the honest truth is that material is going to go out there, and you're not going to come with it. So they're going to have to open the box up, and they're going to see 2 or 3 books in there. They're going to have to know what order to read them in, how to pick them up. And
that has an effect of assembly. Or we assemble the products often with the idea of what are you going to open, see first when you open the box. So how we stack it in the box has that effect as well. But yeah, the idea of how are people going to read this? How are people going to take it? One great thing about role-playing today, the best way to learn how to play a role-playing game is to sit down with somebody playing a role-playing game. And that's been the challenge. I have written more than enough what is role-playing introductions than I will ever care to do so. Nowadays, with the internet, with people who are doing live play sessions, they are tuning in and they're getting an idea of how the game should function, how the interaction goes, how the call and response, how do people handle these rules, and they're seeing it on the internet. And I think that accounts in part for the rising popularity over the past 5-10 years of what you've seen in role-playing games. And I think that's great.
Yeah, it's definitely more accessible, and it's more like out there in front of you, and it's kind of like you can't really hide from it in a way. You just turn on YouTube or the internet, and something's going to be out there, and you're going to, like, anyone who's maybe interested in storytelling or drama or adventure or whatever is going to sort of think, what is this thing? And then they end
going to the other end of the timeline. Back at the beginning, when it was a game that was coming out of people playing miniature games at Horticulture Hall in Lake Geneva, they had so much knowledge was just basically assumed that the players had. So people would pick up an original little brown wood grain brown box of D&D, and the stuff was impenetrable. What are they talking about? Stands, why is this character worth 5 men-at-arms? That sort of thing. Because that was all information that was part of the common body of knowledge for people who are playing war games.
So it was taken for granted by those people that were designing it that I'm selling this product to another person that plays war games, so of course they're going to get what we're talking about. So it wasn't even really thought about like, some 14-year-old kid who's just like walking through a hobby shop is going to pick it up.
And again, the D&D section at A.B. Charles in Pittsburgh was in a corner, next to the Osprey books and the metal miniatures of, Prussian hussars and everything, and there might be some Lord of the Rings, illegal Lord of the Rings miniatures, of guys with white trees on their shields, it was a very small operation. And it grew over time. And when we got into the chain bookstores through Random House, it was, that was a moment where they had to start, really explaining. And that's where you see the early basic games, the BX, CMI series of box sets. This is how we're slowly getting out there. But still, it's basically, there is a divide between the people who are writing and the people who are playing. And now you're seeing it all come together because everybody can talk.
Was there a thought then, like as you were designing, say, like going through the Dragonlance material or Forgotten Realms or any of the settings, were you sort of thinking, we want to make this more accessible to people, or I mean, was there any effort?
Yes, there were numerous attempts to how do we teach D&D. Troy Denning worked on a version of Dungeons and Dragons, a large black box that used program learning. You know, program learning. You know, basically you have the little booklet with all the different colored tabs and everything.
Right,
We used that method as it. There was one attempt with Dragon Strike where we used a video that was a videotape VCR that basically was part of the game. That basically, you know, you plug it in and basically, and it was, I'll be honest, it was a little cheesy, but still, it was just an attempt to get people into playing games and, you know, understanding the fantasy.
Well, I think it's a tough thing for a lot of people. I mean, I see it with my kids. I mean, it's hard to sort of juggle all of this imaginary information in your head, and then also not just juggle it, but then you have to reconcile it with what's like on your page, and then what's going on with the dice rolls, and then what's going on with like what the other characters are doing.
And it's a social game too, and it basically has a lot of people who are engaging with as friends are hanging out together. Most of my D&D groups currently are that, where we've played together for years. We're getting together. We could be getting together for, you know, a spaghetti dinner. Instead, we're getting together to play, you know, Call of Cthulhu.
Right.
So,
but I think
it's. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's maybe where the game master comes in at a certain point. I mean, I think, even though, of course, the game master, it's perfectly acceptable as far as I'm concerned for obviously, someone's going to GM or DM for the first time. The game master, I think, is often is maybe the person that's trying to sort of balance it out and step back and see what everyone's doing. And
yes, I compare DMing to you're throwing a dinner party. You know, and people are going to, and by one of your responsibilities, make sure everyone's engaged, everyone's, you know, paying. They don't all going to pay attention. You may have to deal with something over here, or that person may be on their phone, that sort of thing. But you're ultimately responsible. There's a wave of new games, Blades in the Dark, for example, that basically shift a lot of that responsibility. They take a lot of the control out of the DM's hands, but they also basically ask the players to do a lot more stepping up to create a shared story. And that's a nice little revolution as well, to see how that continues to grow. One big thing is I always think game design as a conversation, because you know, people created D&D and then people decided how they were going to fix it. And then other people said, that's a great idea, but you didn't go far enough. This is how we do it. And then the next group comes along and says, no, you're all wrong. This is what makes it. Or we need to be more accurate with, you know, whether you can swim in plate mail, or this needs to be more, you know, playable on computers. So you see a conversation and dissent of ideas as you go through the family trees of all of these, you know, fantasy projects that have all these role-playing projects that have come up over the years.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think if you go back and you look, and I think that the basic RPGs are so relatively new, it's maybe hard to get like a full perspective on it. But I think looking at
my lifetime, relatively new. So
yes, well, yeah, sure. So I think looking though at it decade by decade, you do see this sort of like shifting of the model basically and the way that it works. But what I find really interesting is the fact that you can sort of pick from different models whatever you happen to like. You can go OSR, old school. You can play, you know, 5e. You could play Vampire the Masquerade. You can play Blades in the
LARPing.
Dark. LARPing as well. There's so many different approaches, and what's really nice about this time is that I think things have kind of exploded, and so there are so many choices. And it's so accessible to so many people that you can really, you know, it's something that everybody can partake in, and they can enjoy it and have a good time and play it the way that they want to play it, because we play it in the privacy of our own homes for the most part.
Among friends.
Yeah.
People play at conventions, but still you're dealing with a self-selected audience of people who are enjoying the game, who basically have a good foundational collective, you know, envisioning of what it's like to play.
So to sort of shift gears.
Okay, good luck.
Yeah, we'll try.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I wanted to talk a little bit more about those settings that you've designed, because I think that I'm just really curious to know, like, so we talked a little bit about what happened with Dragonlance. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe Forgotten Realms and Spelljammer, Al-Qadim? I know that's a lot. But
wow. The short version about Forgotten Realms is the Forgotten Realms were created by Ed Greenwood. They were a setting in which he set stories and then eventually set D&D adventures in. So basically the realms existed. His first story he wrote like when he was 12 was One Comes Unheralded from Zerta. And we actually tracked it down and made a little chapbook one year for Gen Con.
Cool.
But he was working, and he started writing articles for Dragon Magazine. He would write about 7 magical staffs, and he would have an introduction where Elminster shows up at his house and drinks his beer and basically tells him about 7 magical staffs. And Kim Mohan, remember him, he would take out all the fluff and basically print the 7 magical staffs. And after about the 3rd or 4th time this happened, he started leaving in the stuff about Elminster. And so Elminster started appearing in Dragon Magazine. Now, Dragonlance came out and was doing okay, but management was concerned that it would fade. What are we going to do next? And I was the bright young soul that said, well, Ed's been writing about this campaign setting that he has in Dragon Magazine. Let's see if he's got something there. And so I was the guy tasked with calling Ed and telling him we'd like to, buy it. And I basically asked him, what do you got? He's got all sorts of notes. I sent them to you, and that's great. Can we purchase it? And he said, well, you published some of it in Dragon Magazine. I thought you already owned it. And I said, let's not tell anybody about that.
Right.
Let's not tell anybody you said that. And we bought the realms in exchange for a small amount of money, a computer without a hard drive, and a promise that we would publish books that he had written. And that was the initial deal of how we did it. And he started sending me material. And it was, he's a librarian in Ontario, Canada, and he basically would send me stuff. Federal Express was the fastest way we could get it in those days. Right. And it would be wrapped in 5 layers of Canadian cellophane, heavy plastic stuff that you can insulate your windows with. And the floppy disks, because we did have like personal computers at the time, were wrapped in foil and then wrapped in cellophane and wrapped in foil again. It would take me like 15 minutes to unwrap stuff. And so from that source material, I always refer to him being the architect of the realms. I was the engineer, because taking all of that material and synthesizing it down to the first gray box was one of the challenges. So that's my end. I fill in pieces. In Dragonlance, the gnomes came out of satire and engineering. I pitched gnomes as being that, and the gods came out of my personal campaign, the gods of Dragonlance. Over in the realms, Joaquin, the god of merchants, was something that we don't have one. Let's add one. The name of the world, Toril, is actually the name of my old campaign. That's all we took over there, because he had a name for the continent, Faerun, but he did not have a name for the planet itself. So the planet became Toril, and because I was writing the encyclopedia and I wanted it to be the first entry, the full name was Avir Toril. So basically, I made sure.
There you go. That's
specifically like to make it the first entry. Yeah.
First in the yellow pages.
Yes, aardvark. So.
Right. So then.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say. So with that then, because I had been under the impression it was more of a fusion, but it sounds like you're giving most of the credit there to Ed Greenwood on it, or.
In the original gray box, you'll see sections that like the description of the area and then Elminster's notes. And Elminster's notes on those particular locations were pretty much what Ed had originally written. And he would write, single space, typewritten margins of a 16th of an inch. He would cut manuscripts up and then repaste them together, and then photocopy them and send them out. There was just he sent a map that was like 24, 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper that we assembled, and we also made changes to it. Doug Niles was working on a project for TSR UK. He was writing a novel for their British Dragonlance. And then we closed down TSR UK. He had a half-written novel. So we adopted it, redrew the Moonshae Isles, and that became Darkwalker on Moonshae. We drained a glacier so we could have a high-level area for a set of adventures there. We gave parts of the world in the north to various computer game companies so they could set up online games for CompuServe and AOL. So we had like a whole, this was a whole big, I was the traffic cop. Literally, I was the guy that basically was, everybody was sending stuff to me and I was starting to say, okay, that works. Okay, we better talk to Doug before you do that.
Right. But I mean, I think that that's like a huge, that's a huge responsibility, right? Because like, I think that what you're doing is you're really like trying to pull the best out and like assemble it in a way that really highlights the best of what they have to offer.
And we had very talented people who were all, contributing to it and throwing it in and taking some of that foundation work and then expanding it out into full projects and to full adventures.
Did it feel like a lot for you? So what age and how long had you been working at TSR at this point?
Oh God,
sorry,
4 years maybe. I'm trying to remember when the Realms came out. I want to say 86.
It just seems like such
wrong.
It seems like such a heavy responsibility. I mean, maybe in retrospect with what Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance and Spelljammer and all that, and what they've all become. But at the time, I sort of feel like
we had no clue. We were just, we were putting stuff together. We basically seeing what flew. We were very fortunate. We refer Tracy Hickman was a big fan of the Wright stuff, the movie, and so there was sort of that esprit de corps there. But we also would refer to meatball design. Something comes in on fire, and we've got to get it repaired because it basically has to go out to print by a week from Thursday.
Right.
So we've had all sorts of challenges and all sorts of what can we do to put it all together. Waterdeep in the North, the first Forgotten Realms adventure. There was so much about Waterdeep. There was no room for anything about the North.
Right.
And that we said that's how long the project's going to be. We ended up shrinking the information about the guilds of Waterdeep to mouse type, little indicia type size, and printed that. So we had a lot of and we had a lot of influence in our map making. We had a great map making department. Our layout. We had Ravenloft, Tracy's Ravenloft, that whole three-dimensional map of Ravenloft, which was fantastic. The work of Dave Sutherland, working with Tracy, basically, getting this whole three-dimensional castle in place. This was, we were doing things for the first time, which was really kind of cool, and scary as all heck.
I think so, and it reminds me actually of I think when George Lucas when he tried to make Star Wars originally, he took the effects that he was going to have done around to every movie studio, and they all said, "Sorry, kid, this can't be done. It's impossible. Great idea, just impossible." And so he took it to all these people that worked in the industry forever, and everyone turned him down. And then so what he ended up doing was hiring a bunch of carpenters fresh out of college, and he didn't tell them that everyone in Hollywood said it couldn't be done. And then out of that, something amazing came out of it. And so this idea of you sort of doing something that hadn't been done before, but maybe having that sort of youthful ignorance and of to just sort of rush into danger.
We didn't know enough to know we were doing the wrong thing. Or the right thing.
But, I was good, right, because it worked out. All of these settings have endured.
Very quickly, I'm going to do this very quickly. Spelljammer came out of we had a brainstorming meeting at a restaurant in Lake Geneva. And, the wait staff is basically coming by and we're talking about dragons and we're talking about, spaceships. We're talking about all sorts of, they thought we were an advanced team for Steven Spielberg and that Warren Spector was Steven Spielberg, because that's the only, you have to be movie people to be that crazy. Go ahead. For Spelljammer, go ahead.
Please.
Okay. For Spelljammer, I pitched an image, a guy standing on a deck of a ship in space And he could breathe and he wouldn't drift off, and it was gravity. And then we do fantasy in space. And Jim Ward loved the idea, and that's where we started with that pitch, and we grew it from there. Al-Qadim, we had an Oriental Adventures Terra Tour, and basically, how can we do Arabian Nights? And that basically grew out of the concept of we want to do something worthwhile in that particular setting. So, okay, your turn.
I was just going to say, did any of that influence for, like, say, Spelljammer come out of, like, the fact that, I mean, there's, like, Star Wars coming out and it's kind of reached its height, or was it just something that sort of popped into your head? Or...
I think, well, it was, it was more space fantasy, but it was also trying to push the borders of what is D&D. Because there always was a push that the TSR, we do genre fantasy. Once the exciting goes someplace, go to these small companies, etc. And we did Spelljammer, and Spelljammer, D&D in space. It's that traditional. It's got giant flying manta ray ships,
right.
But that's traditional fantasy.
But it's funny, like, there's so many people today that I see this again and again when I'm on the internet. So many people love that setting and they really want it to return. And every time Wizards of the Coast talks about a new mystery book, so many people you see Spelljammer, and then it's not Spelljammer. And I'm not trying to say anything.
They work down the hill from me, literally. I mean, basically, I'm on a hill in Kent, and they're down in the valley in Renton. And I think they do that on purpose, just to torment people, because they bring some people, like the GIF, the big hippo-headed humanoids I created out of Spelljammer, and everybody goes, they're doing Spelljammer. No, so I think they're benefiting from pulling pieces of it, but I don't know if they're going to go back or not. That's their call. Again, it's a conversation. What we did was great. If we would probably do something different if we did it today.
It's kind of interesting to me, though, that role players who kind of just get, like, their whole trade is to sort of make stuff up. Like, my approach has always sort of been, well, there's no 5e version of Spelljammer, but I can walk over here and I can get the material, and then I can just sort of, like, I'll change a few stats here or there.
And people are doing that. People are creating their own. I mean, it's the difference between a player and a designer is wafer thin, because people, well, it's a lot of stuff that comes from people. This was my campaign, and I'm going to turn it into a book or a role-playing game or a comic book. I'm going to take it to that next level. And it's much easier now than it was 30 years ago. Desktop publishing, the net, everything is basically making things much more. I found an old manuscript for Mystara, the known world, and that I had done. We halfway through the product, we changed our mind. So I had all this information. I found the old manuscript someone had given me, and I gave it away to someone who basically was a big D&D fan, and basically into Mystara, and he's working to see if he can publish it, because, and I dread this because it's unedited, and but it's just like, this is stuff from 20 years ago, but people are interested in what we did back then.
But I think it's really interesting when, and somebody says, thank you for Tinker Gnomes, by the way. And,
the Gnomes of Dragonlance. That's what
so Brock is saying that. I missed it. Brock, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm multitasking, and you don't understand how difficult it is for me, Brock, but I'm trying to look at your stuff. And he's also saying Al-Qadim was really well done.
The Tinker Gnomes were very much, and I mentioned this before, a satire of my engineering life, where the gnomes would come up with a solution to a problem, and then they'd come up to a solution for the solution, and then they'd come up with solutions to that solution. So basically, it's like that engineering job security where you keep fixing the patches that you made before.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There you go. I think, to be honest, as an English teacher, I think it's fascinating when you go back and you look at other versions of what might have been. Like, I feel like it lends you a lot of perspective on where you are now and where you could have been. And it also sort of shows you something. So I had often kind of thought about this. Like, recently I don't know if you've been following this at all, but like, there have been a lot of movies that's being released in director's cuts or alternate versions. And what's interesting to me is you can have both, But what's more interesting is like as someone that, helps others, write their papers better or write those stories better, being able to hold up two different things and give this to my student and say, read these two and think about the decisions that were made beneath each creation. And it really helps you kind of get into the mind of the creator and think about it.
So one of my regular game players, an editor named John Ratliff, has written a 2-volume analysis of The Hobbit. He is a Tolkien scholar. And this was well received and everything because he was going through all the original manuscripts and getting information from Tolkien's oldest son, Christopher, and basically doing the detective work and seeing, well, hey, he wrote this section back here in this part of his life, and then he rewrote it over here. And what changed? And how did it evolve? How is the storytelling? It's not just a finished product springs from the head of Zeus and there it is in all its wonders. It is part of the process, and you're often hitting a moving target. I think projects aren't necessarily done so much as they are shipped, and in computer games that's particularly true now as games continue to evolve after they have been released into the wild. Usually you release something and then you have to get the feedback and figure out what you did right, what you did wrong. Now it's a much more iterative process.
Yes. Yeah, you can totally see that. And I mean, there's some recent releases in particular that, I actually enjoy them. I won't mention them because I don't want to pick on anyone. But, I feel like there's some things that they're unfairly held to these ideas. And I like to actually see the game evolving and changing over time and all of that.
I think they've done a good in D&D. I think they've done a good job like that. Basically, there's definite markers between the editions, and you can see the revisions. You can see where people changed, and it's a discussion. You have different people working on different projects and bringing their ideas forward.
Yeah, and I sort of feel like Wizards of the Coast has sort of reeled back and I might be wrong. I feel like they've reeled back the number of releases and upped the quality and the thoughtfulness behind each release. And
they're doing nothing. They're doing hardbacks. They aren't doing, the pamphlet styles, the modules anymore. Basically, you're seeing a higher quality of project, but there are much bigger as well, and they have a lot more creatives working on it.
Yes.
Forgotten Realms was me and Ed for the initial gray box. Original Marvel Superheroes was myself, and I did the design, functional work, and initial outlines. But that whole face front true believer Stan Lee type that's all Steve Winter, the editor, and that's what Steve did. Did a fantastic job with that. Now that's not normally how the editor designer thing works, but in our case it worked well together. But still, it was just a couple people, just as opposed to a major. We work in computer games. You have 300 people if you're going to do a AAA MMO, that sort of thing. That's cut and fine. So.
How did Marvel Superheroes come about then? Because you mentioned hey, true believer. When I go back, so first of all, I remember I bought Marvel Superheroes when I was in 6th grade or something, and I bought it at a school auction where I could, for good behavior, you would get Mano dollars from my teacher, Mr.
Oh,
Mano.
okay.
And so I saved up all these Mano dollars, and the first thing, someone said, okay, Mr. Mano's I've got Marvel Superheroes for sale, and I just jumped up, and I was like, I'll give you 60 Mano dollars for it. And everyone silently looked at me and just said, well, nobody really wanted it. You could have given them $1, but okay, 60. So I turned it over, and I went home and I studied it, and I played that game with my sister a lot. And the funny thing was, it felt like a Marvel comic, and even today when I go back, and you probably know this because you can search the web, and if you search the web, you find a veritable army of people who will not play any other superhero game but Marvel Superheroes. How did that come together? How did you guys get that Marvel look and feel, that true believer?
Well, we started as a personal project at college. We had wrapped up a big epic in D&D and didn't want to play D&D again, so I started putting together a superhero adventure game in Purdue University, West Lafayette, Indiana, with the junior achievement branch of the Avengers. And these were characters with names like Carl, the fire breather, and Big Man on Campus, and the Beacon. And my favorite, Super Pin, the pro bowler of steel, who would ride around on this big silver bowling ball. And this was like late 70s, and it was silly. It was fun, and we would guest star.
Second string superheroes.
They were fourth. They were below the Great Lakes Avengers. You know, right. it was just. And they would, occasionally would guest star Marvel supervillains. And at the end of the semester, they went to New York to meet the mayor and fight Spider-Man. They met Spider-Man and fought the mayor, because that's what they do. And we had a great time with it. And one of the things they asked us to do when they said we were asking for 3 adventures, they asked us for Blue Sky Project. What would you do if you had the ability to, the resources to do it? And I made a pitch for a cyberpunk. This was before cyberpunk show.
Wow.
Art Talsorian. A very grimdark cyberpunk type thing that sort of so acidic it ate its way through the bottom of a file cabinet. And they came back and said, yeah, we aren't going to do this. What else you got? I said, well, I got the superhero game that I basically put together in college. And that became a foundation. Then there was an announcement that Gen Con was coming up. Everybody put their, we got the catalog of all the events. And Mayfair Games, one of our rivals, announced that they were doing a Marvel superheroes game. So our licensing people called up Marvel and said, so are you really doing this? And they said, who's Mayfair?
Oh.
They had not heard anything about this. And so we started talking to them and we got the license. So we got the Marvel license. I worked through many, many iterations of that universal table that you see on the back covers.
Yes, right.
We were very tight for time, which is why Steve and I basically broke up the responsibilities the way we did. Literally, this is one of the few times I was at the printer when we were running off the first batch because we had to get the legal statement right and Marvel had not approved it yet. So if Marvel did not approve it, I was going to change the legal statement on the press. They approved it, but but basically that was the first print run. And we were doing short adventures because we didn't know if if they said you have to put these many adventures out in the first year, and we didn't know if that meant within a full year or by the end of the year. So we ended up doing a lot of those, and it was wonderful. We had a lot of access to Marvel. This was at a time when they were starting out doing like the official handbooks of the Marvel Universe.
Yes, yeah.
We had access to, and the relationship was very, very good. It was the type of thing where if I needed a particular piece of art from a comic book, I would call in. They would send somebody to Jersey, where they had the warehouse where all the art was stored. They would basically make a copy of it, and they would send us the copy. And so every few weeks, I'd get a whole bunch of original art, photostats that we could basically put into the game. And we got original artists. We got John Byrne to do a cover for us. Yes. This was all, and I wish I had saved the original art piece he had done, because on the back did some doodling and he was redesigning the TSR logo. So
oh, no kidding. That
I did not save that piece of art, and I that's one of the few things I do regret.
John Byrne revised. He's redone Superman. He's redone Spider-Man, and the TSR logo.
TSR logo
somewhere legendarily now gone.
Yeah, the now gone. Now lost to the mist of time. But Marvel was really a good operation. That the license worked very, very well.
Yeah, because it's one of those cases where, I mean, how many times have you heard licensed games just are, no good. But like time and time and time again, I feel like that Marvel Superheroes games it's one of the gold standards for like licensed properties that become a game.
When it came out, we got reviews along the lines of, like it was a little childish, it's a little simple, it's introductory, it's not Champions. Which was the big complex, superhero game. It wasn't intended to be, but every time someone else has done a superhero role-playing game, they come back and they compare it to Marvel now, which is kind of appreciated. We have sort of become the gold standard. And you're right, there are people who are deeply researching new characters for the phase rip system, named after the ability.
Yes.
And 4 color systems, and they have a wide variety. And this is all in the net, and I think that it's wonderful. And I'm not going to get involved in it because I'm not sure. Supposedly, Marvel, of course, owns the characters, but TSR in the legal statement stated that they own the system. So,
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But the good news is, when anybody decides to do a Marvel style favorite Universal Table type game, they always end up changing enough because game design is a conversation, and they're going to keep wanting to fix it. I always said early on that I always got 3 comments about the early Marvels. I love your game. I love your game, and here's how you fix it. And I play Champions, but I buy all your product because I steal all the stats and convert them.
Right. It was, well, I mean, I remember I played that like endlessly, and very recently I've had so many friends who are like, let's go back, let's play it again, let's get out like our dice and our crayons and
crayons, yes,
fill in the numbers. What you've sort of mentioned a few things here. So you've mentioned like you were thinking about the cyberpunk setting. You also had like a superhero setting. Do you hop between genres, or is that something that comes about as from you just being a creator, or do you get tired of one genre and want to move to another?
I'd say I get tired of it, but Zeb Cook once said, the good designers have a low boredom threshold, and we are always looking for something new, something different, something challenging. In addition, when working at TSR, my boss for a large chunk of that was Jim Ward, who designed Gamma World. And he would come upstairs and pry my fingers off the project that I was, the new line that I truly loved and did. I did this about 5 times, and basically send me over to something new. And that was actually really kind of nice because when you had a lot of designers who would be identified with one product, and had basically they would switch to another line, and they wouldn't be as accepted because the stuff that was strengths in one were weaknesses in another.
Right.
So we ended up basically being able to shift gears gave me a lot of versatility and a lot of ability to, I'm going to work on a science fiction project. Here are my rules. Here's my core ethos. This is my moment to moment play. And then I can work on a fantasy project. And it keeps things fresh, and it does keep things alive. And I've, in every case in Marvel, training the people who were going to replace me, which was, Stephen Shen did a fantastic job as the heir to the Empire when I moved on to Al-Qadim, when I moved on to other projects. Karen Boomgarden as an editor, and Julia Martin as an editor for the Forgotten Realms, did wonderful jobs after I had, basically moved on to doing other stuff. And that's kind of fun. And also it's a lot of fun to be the first guy in. There's a lot of scary stuff involved, and a lot of stuff that we don't know where the walls are yet. Yeah. But by the same token, you're doing things for the first time.
Right, and you're setting like I think that there would be like a real attractive nature like to that, like the idea of like you're having all this freedom, no one's ever done it before, so you're kind of setting your own definitions and setting your own limits and like breaking through limits. That's like something that I think is really impressive, though, is the fact that you would just sort of make it up as you go along and you work on it.
We like I said, we had foundations, we had things we based it on, whether it was 1001 Nights for Al-Qadim, whether it was a lot of comic books in for Marvel superheroes, whether it was Ed's original material with all the tiny little typeface that he at one point
the librarians.
At one point his T key broke on his typewriter, so we went in and he would draw in the T's after he finished a page. So it was like a little graveyard with little crosses everywhere.
Right. Yeah, that's not an omen, not at all. So then you eventually though made you started like writing straight prose, and when I say, of course, RPGs are prose, but you're writing straight prose fiction. So you're doing, you jumped into doing comics for DC, and then your own novels for various licensed properties, some of which were TSR, some of which
novels were first. Azure Bonds was the first of them. It was
Okay.
released in the same year as the gray box for Dragonlance. Very much a case of we wanted to do novels because we did novels for Dragonlance, but as opposed to doing one big epic, which we did with Dragonlance, we wanted to do a whole bunch of different creatives. And Ed and I were, of course, busy with the box set. Doug Niles did the first one because he had a half-written novel that then the world disappeared under. So we redrew the things. Bob Salvador did the second. That was Crystal Shard. And he had like submitted a concept to the book department using Doug's characters. And the book department responded, yeah, do you want to do something original on your own with your own characters? And he said, I can do that. And yeah, sure, why not? You know, Ed got the third one. And I was going to, because he knew where some of the bodies were buried. And I got the fourth one because I knew where some of the bodies were buried. And was driving to Milwaukee from Lake Geneva with my wife. We would go up every 2 weeks to buy comic books and read them at a Chi-Chi's Mexican restaurant. And I just started telling her the plot of this book. And by the time I got to Milwaukee, I had a co-writer. And there was one of the characters had changed gender. So interestingly enough, so that was like the beginning of my wife and I working together on writing the book.
That's
and right. I'm very much that. I'm a rather fast writer. Two coats of paint. And so I would write and she would rewrite. We would work from a very tight plot. So we both knew what was going down. And I've told this story elsewhere. We would go to restaurants we had never gone to before to discuss plot. Because if we got into an argument, we would just never go back to that restaurant. Yeah,
that's right.
So
did you? What's it like? What's it like writing a novel with another person? Like, I've heard the analogy, and it's actually not the best analogy because in some ways it makes sense. But I've heard like writing a book with another person is like having a baby with another person. And what they mean is one person having, or two people having one baby. But like, how is it like working together? So you will write this first draft or second draft, and then she will come in and revise or rewrite.
And I will comment, and then we'll revise again. It will go to an editor. The editor will have comments. I will convince my wife that they're good comments and we should make changes. And and we basically work our way through the process of multiple drafts that way. But a lot of it is I have a probably stronger investment initially from the initial plot and from that first draft. And Kate, works wonders, with building out on it, showing up with character where it's working, where it's not working. So it was a very good team up between the two of us. When I worked with Ed Greenwood on Cormier, the high concept there is we were going to write a Michener novel, like Kansas, Nebraska.
Right.
The first chapter, the earth cools, and then settlers arrive.
Yes, right.
And this was going to be on Cormier. And so we had a past theme and a present theme, and a present story about assassination attempt at King Zoom. And oddly enough, I wrote the past stuff, all the history material of these little vignettes leading up, and he wrote the main story, etc. And then we swapped and rewrote each other, because I tend to be bold and cinematic and confusing in my writing, and Ed tends to be long and expository and confusing in his writing. So we swapped each other, and the editor of the book sent us a note which I truly treasure to this day. And it's like, this was better than I had any right to expect. And
that's
I consider that my gold star moment.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. How do you feel about writing novels then? Do you enjoy the process, or
yes.
do you like the change from the RPG sort of style of writing? And
it's very different. Writing in an RPG is very much empowering the GM and the players to basically write their own story. There's a lot more concern about characterization and justifications and why their character is doing what they're doing, and it's a different set of muscles in the same brain. So it's got, and I often work in all my novels have been shared world, Star Wars, Starcraft, Warcraft, Guild Wars, and in Magic the Gathering. And often it's the case where I'm doing the fun part is doing the research and digging down and seeing if there's a story here, and seeing if
Right.
there's something that basically both is going to be entertaining and also true to the original product, true to the computer game or true to the card game. That people
Right.
say, yes, I get that same vibe off of
Yeah.
reading the Brothers War as I did from the Antiquities set
Yes.
of Magic cards. I know more about these characters. So that's all really the fun part. Alfred Hitchcock once said, the best part of movie making is the storyboards. Filming it is an afterthought. And the type of thing of writing, when you write a book, the first week is absolutely great because it's fresh and new. And when you're done and you turn it over, it's great because it's finished and people
Right.
like it. And between the two spots, 50 miles of bad road.
Right.
So
With that, then you've got the RPG design and creation. You've got your novels that you're writing. What was kind of like the thing? You eventually went freelance and sort of
yes.
you left and you're on your own. What was kind of the impetus for that, or what was the reasoning?
I left TSR the first time because I had burned out to some degree. I mentioned the D&D Mistara project that we changed, like right at the 11th hour, and basically involved a lot of writing. And I could keep doing that, but it began to feel like I was repeating myself.
Right.
You began to say I could keep doing world books and that sort of thing, but it was feeling I needed to go do something else. And Margaret Weiss, who had left the company earlier to write novels with Tracy and set up her own game company, was doing card games. And so I left. She made an offer, and I came to work for her for a while. We did a Star Trek original series game for not Upper Deck, I think it's Lear. But we basically during the card game Blood. And during the time when I was gone from TSR was bought by Wizards, and everybody
Okay.
moved out
Yeah.
to Seattle. And
Yeah.
it was nice, but it was getting kind of lonely. I came out to Seattle for a wedding. Weddings
Right.
have an important part of my career. And visited Bill Slavicsek, who I had known from back at TSR. I said, "So, would you be willing to hire, an old designer back?" And he reached in his pocket and said, "Yes, I have this shiny little gem. Come work for us." So I rejoined TSR's Wizards of the Coast. Worked on things like D20 Modern, Introductory Adventures, D&D Adventure for the first movie, which will never see the light of day, and was caught in a layoff. And from that point, was back to being freelance. And freelance is a challenge. You have to be always looking for the next job.
Yeah.
You always have to be, I say that half the job is getting the job, half the job is doing the job, and half the job is getting paid for the job. And because that doesn't add up, that's why freelance is such a challenge. But basically, had a lot of opportunities. Went to work for WizKids on their superhero clicks and Mage Knight. And during this time, got an opportunity to work for a German branch of Ubisoft for one of their Settlers games. Not connected to Settlers of Catan, this is a different Settlers. And so they, and the strength of that, interviewed with Guild Wars with ArenaNet, failed the first interview, came back later, and they hired me with ArenaNet for 10 years, and
Wow.
now I've jumped over, and I've been working for the past 5 years on Amazon as a narrative designer, which now is an official category, which it wasn't,
Yeah,
15
so
years
exciting.
ago. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Isn't that?
but I'm still building worlds, and that's what I do. I used to build environmental equipment. Now I build worlds.
Yeah, I really see the connections. Like when I think about it, like I can really see it. Like I can't, I haven't done either one of these things, but I can totally see it in everything that you say and the way that you're describing things. I mean, the whole idea of sort of looking at the problem, focusing on fixing
Yeah.
it, and all of that stuff. I mean, it really strikes me as a sort of a natural progression. Do you ever think yeah, I want to like go do some civil engineering? Or are you pretty happy like doing the narrative engineering?
I am much happier doing narrative
Okay,
engineering. When I was
glad to hear
doing,
it.
doing structures and safety walkways, I
Yeah.
was always afraid that there would be an entire school class complete with nuns that were going to be walking on this walkway at some time, and just everything would come down. And it just is. You make a bad design, you make a bad design in game design. It just doesn't work. But no one dies for it.
Cool. I'm
So
so happy
I
to hear that.
really feel, I'm very comfortable with the route my life has taken. So,
Excellent. Well, I need to say to those of you that are watching, I had originally emailed Jeff and I said, hey, Jeff, would like an hour be okay or so? And he warned me and he sort of
yes.
said with a little smiley face, he's like, well, the questions you've asked here might be a little bit longer. And who am I but a simple
I
YouTube
warned
fool
you.
who has allowed the conversation to go way too far
Mm.
on. And I do, though, very much appreciate your time, Jeff. It was so interesting to talk to you tonight, and I thank you so much. In closing, let me just ask you, is there anything, this is a pop question that I didn't write, is there anything
Mhm.
you'd like the world to know about Jeff Grubb? Oh, I put him on the
No.
spot. Oh, okay.
I'm very comfortable with what everyone does know about Jeff. Okay, one thing that people don't know yet is what I do for my spare time, such as it
Oh.
is when I'm not designing and playing games,
Mm-hmm.
and I am writing plays, and I am enjoying that tremendously because I'm writing for myself as opposed to an alternate market. I took a playwriting class about 5, 6 years ago, and our group stayed together. And we get together either at someone's house or on Zoom nowadays, and we read our latest sections. And so I have like two finished plays, and one had a reading at a local, theater, like a reader's theater type thing. And I'm just very happy about
Mm.
because it doesn't have to go anywhere further and doesn't have to get a full production. But
Right.
I have been enjoying. So that's the thing that Jeff is doing right now when he should be, designing 7th edition D&D. So
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for coming on tonight. I wanna thank you, and I want to thank all of the folks in the chat. I do appreciate your comments, and I want to apologize. I'm not maybe the best multitasker, so I was looking at some of the comments. I was bringing them up. Thank you, Jeff. It's been wonderful talking to you. And I wish you, I don't even have to wish you because you have all the best, but I do still wish you all the best with your future endeavors.
thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you, Jeff, and good night, everybody.